Okay, we're talking about George Simon Kaufman, born November 16th, 1889, in Pittsburgh. An interesting little tidbit: Kaufman and Conley attended the same school, and they were a few years apart, and they were absolutely unaware of it. So Kaufman graduates from Pittsburgh High in '07, and his father, he's of Jewish descent. All of the other people that we talked about were of all white Anglo-Saxon descent. So when he got out of high school, he says, "Well, I'm going to do a little bit of law at kind of the behest of his father." And he was the first Kaufman to graduate. I said, "Well, why not? You should be a lawyer. You know, forget about the garments thing. It's a bad idea." So Kaufman goes to study law, and that lasts about 3 months. And he says, "I've had enough of this." And he started selling hat bands for hats. And he loved it. Why did he love it? He loved it because he was able to interact with people. And by the way, he hated interacting with people. But he was able to interact with people so he could gain perspectives. This guy was intense. Absolutely intense. The quintessential... If he was born in Manhattan, he would be the quintessential Jewish Manhattanite. He's the Jerry Seinfeld of the 1920s. He was nitpicky. He was anal. He never wanted to be touched or hugged or kissed. Well, unless it was by a beautiful girl, of course. And he was dark. And incredibly insightful, and incredibly witty. And did he have a kind side? Yeah, he had a great heart. But as one of his fellow roundtablers said, "I've never seen it." So he decided, well, I'm going to move to New York. To hell with this selling hat bands thing. And he moved into 150 West 58th Street at the Park Savoy and lived there till he died. But the first thing he did is he got himself a job. And he became a journalist for the New York Times. Not a daily writer, a journalist. And then became, as well as the journalist, became the drama critic for the New York Times. So in 1918, he debuts his first melodrama called "Someone in the House." And this is at the Knickerbocker Theater. I don't know if anybody's familiar with New York City, but what a hell of a place. And from 1920, and this is kind of an interesting little note, from 1921 to 1958, or through 1958, there were one or more of his plays, either directed or written, in one or more theaters in New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. One or more plays from 1921 through 1958, written or directed by George S. Kaufman. Did everybody hear that? Yeah, that's amazing. So, And these plays, who did he collaborate with? Harpo Marx, Groucho Marx, Mose Hart, my favorite, Maury Riskin, Harvey Ruby, Irving Berlin, George and Ira Gershwin, George M. Cohen, Rodgers and Hart, Rodgers and Hammerstein, just Hart, just Hammerstein, just Rodgers, May Gordon, Cole Porter. He became such fast friends with Cole Porter, he didn't know what to do with himself. He didn't know what to do with himself. He found that Cole Porter was probably the most handsome man he had ever met. And he said that out loud. And Cole Porter was absolutely amazed by that. Of course he would be, because we all know about Cole Porter today, don't we? Yeah. Now, the one thing about Kaufman is he was scandalous. He was scandalous. So let's talk about that. 1917, he was first married to Beatrice Barkow, who was the shoelace heiress from Pittsburgh. And she was what? Good old Pittsburgh. She was a writer and wit in her own right. And he couldn't handle that. And so his eyes roamed, and he was a player. And so, how do I put this? He met Mary Astor, the actress, okay, the German, Dutch, French actress. I can't remember what her real name was. Do you know? An absolutely gorgeous, I mean, model. She was the Crawford of our time. And they had a love affair from the time that he met her on his stage until, I would say, I don't know, the late 40s. And it was an on-again, off-again love affair. And he had several romances with several other wives of friends. But anyway, so Beatrice divorces him, and he ends up marrying Louine McGrath, who was best friends with Cole Porter. And Cole wanted her in every movie and every play that he ever put together, because she too was an amazing beauty and a great singer. So this is called The Scandal in 1936. He's in 1940. No, he divorced Beatrice in 45, but in 36 he has this affair. Mary Astor is, of course, still married to Franklin Thorpe, who I'll get into. Was in a relationship, not a sexual relationship, but was in a relationship with Edwin Pond Parker, the husband of Dorothy Parker, the first husband of Dorothy Parker. So, and they were brokers and bankers together. So, I mean, it's very incestuous. There's a lot of incestuousness going on here. And so there was said that there were children being born out of wedlock, and none of that was true. That was all tabloid at the time. But it became a big scandal in 1936 because she was going through a divorce from Thorpe. And the paternity of her child was in question. And remember, 1936, paternity of children in question is scandalous. Today, it doesn't really matter. So, what was his? What did he? I don't know, what was his life? What did he give us at the end of his life? 29 films, 1 memoir, 41 plays and musicals, 2 full musicals, 1,000 journalistic pieces, and tens of thousands of critiques. Tens of thousands of critiques. Amazing. 2 Pulitzers for drama, 4 Tonys. He was nominated for the Nobel Prize in Drama. Nominated. So, a hell of a lot of work. And he died in 1961 in New York City. Just to give you kind of a funny little tie together for the young folks in our group, he had a long time affair from the end of his affair with Mary Astor and the end of his marriage in 1957 to his death in 1961 to Natalie Schaefer. Anybody know who Natalie Schaefer is? No? Mrs. Thurston Howell.
I knew the name sounded familiar.
Yeah. And she was a doll. So 4 of the most beautiful women at the time, he had his hands on. Probably simultaneously. I don't know. I mean, the man had, what did Dorothy say? He's an octopus. So, so I'm going to talk about Alexander Humphreys Walcott. He was born in 1887 in Colts Neck Township in New Jersey on his family's estate, which is called the Flennicks, which was held by the Buckland family, I don't know, 300 years, and is still in the Buckland family, but now it's just a smaller estate than it was. And it was a commune for a period of time when the family wasn't there. When the family moved back, it became a bigger commune because, hell, why not? And we're talking about the 1850s and the 1860s, where communes were not the thing. And he came from a very deep-rooted American family, like the others, unlike Kaufman, who was a child of immigrants. And he was educated as tutored at home. He moved out to Kansas City, Missouri, to be with some cousins because he felt that his mother felt that he was a tearaway and wasn't getting enough guidance. So he went to Central High School, and I'll get back to that. So while at Central High School, which was the best thing that ever happened to Alexander Walcott, was that this gave him the ability to be. He started to read just voracious amounts of books and critiques and information, and that son is driving me crazy. And this is what inspired him to get into the literary efforts. And he called them efforts. For him, it was a struggle. He loved it, but he hated it. So, like I said, he came from land-rich, cash-poor family. His father was a drunkard, ne'er-do-well, who kind of bumped along in certain society, certain circles, in certain areas that he figured he might be able to get a little job off or a little bit of extra cash. And he was quite the philanderer. So, he graduated in '09 from Hamilton College. In 1909, immediately after that, he became a cub reporter for the New York Times. These are the guys out on the street, getting the dirty. Crime, doing the beat, like a cop. By 1914, he became the drama critic for the New York Times. And he held that position until 1922. In 1917, he joined the U.S. Army, and he wanted to be in the Med Corps. He joined the Med Corps. He entered. It all worked out, and the OS wanted him to do. And he was a sergeant about this time. Wanted him to do intelligence reports, and he had a cousin, Colonel Buckland, who said, "No, this guy, he's a great writer. You don't want him doing any intelligence reports. Let's boost the morale of World War I. That's what we need. We need the boosting. We need the morale boosting." So what did he do? He and a group of other sergeants and a couple of officers, his cousin included, created the Stars and Stripes. Anyone familiar with the Stars and Stripes? Yeah? Okay. And that's the newspaper that's still in existence today that our troops read while they're on the battlefield or in their barracks. Anyway, so after 1922, remember he's 1919. He's hanging out at the round table. He's doing his thing at the New York Times, and he leaves the New York Times to join the New York Herald. A better offer. He had a big head. He is probably the most quoted man of his generation. I don't know, how many quotes did you find from him? A couple hundred?
Yeah.
500, 600 quotes. Imagine being quoted. So he got into a fight with the publisher of the Herald and essentially told him that it's the worst paper I've ever worked for, and I hope it burns. And he goes on and works for the World until 1928-29. And he has a controversy at the World because he's critical of the old, stodge, pre-modernist actors and actresses and theater productions, and he's trying to bring in a new modern theater. You know, this whole idea that we need a modernist ideal on stage. The one-man play, as an example. So the World, he resigns from the World, and he goes back to the New York Times in 1929, and basically stays there as an ancillary critic for all kinds of things, everything from food to music. He also joins in 1929 the New Yorker as a permanent staffer. And anybody familiar with the New Yorker? Well, he creates the column called Shouts and Murmurs. And Shouts and Murmurs is still a column, a hysterical, witty column that occurs every single week in that magazine. Started by him. In 29, radio wants him because he's got a great radio presence. He's awful to look at. As he stated, he says, I was probably the ugliest man at the table. Well, no, Walcott never thought Kaufman was a man. So what he does is CBS Radio hires him in '29 to do the early bookworm, which was a critique of all of the books that he particularly chose. And he always chose his friends' books. And if he hated them, he'd hammer them. If he loved them, he loved them. But he was always very honest in his, and he would always open with "Hear ye, hear ye." So, and then in 1929, RKO Radio also gave him a slot called the People's Platform, which was more of an interview. He was like the early Charlie Rose of radio, and he would interview politicians and actors and actresses and people of the day. As he said, I will never interview a common man. So you understood where he's coming from. So, by the way, he died January 23rd, 1943, after he gave his last radio show on the People's Platform. He actually died right on stage. So, what did he give? Oh, by the way, not only did these people eat together and lunch together and play cards together and dance together and marry each other, but they also owned an island together, which was one of Alexander Walcott's family's islands up in Lake Bosemmet in Vermont. And so they went out and summered up there and played up there as well, and would host all kinds of wonderful parties where, you know, the actors and actresses and all of these people at the time would come and hang out. So, what did he give? 4 Broadway plays. He acted in 4 films, wrote 15 books, 1 memoir, created the Stars and Stripes, and laid out 3 melodies, and won 10 Townsend Critics Awards. 10. The average man today can only get 1, but he won 10 in his lifetime. What I want to talk about is he was so, his arms spread so wide. He became fast friends with a lot of people, well, youth-wise from where he came from to his death. But what was very interesting is he would sit in on literary lectures at Columbia University. 2 of these professors became his intimates. One of them being Carl Sandburg and Mark Van Dorn, both Columbia professors of literature. What was important about Mark Van Dorn is Mark Van Dorn, who just passed away in 98, maybe 2000, okay, educated every literary man and woman for that amount of time coming out of Columbia. And to tie things together, he was the educator of John Barrymore, who our dear Peter was a pupil of. So it even comes down to right here in little tiny Gulfport at the Blueberry Patch. So I'll give a couple of lists. He was friends with Stephen Vincent Benet, Mickey Rooney, Judy Garland, Noel Coward. these guys he hung out with, these gals he hung out with, and so he did a great deal. Do you have anything about Walcott?
I just have a few quotes.
Okay. Walcott. All things I really like to do are either immoral, illegal, or fattening. Germany was the cause of Hitler as much as Chicago is responsible for the Chicago Tribune. That's great. I'm tired of hearing it said that democracy doesn't work. Of course it doesn't work. We are supposed to work it. This is Kaufman. Satire is what closes on Saturday night. That's my favorite one. I like that. I understand your new play is full of single entendres.
The one about the woman, the dinner. That's
Oh, when I invite a woman to dinner, I expect her to look at my face. That's the price she has to pay.
I like that one.
So speaking of women, let's get to Dorothy Parker, because I know that the gals want to come up here and read some of her stuff. So she was born Dorothy Rothschild in Long Branch, New Jersey in 1893, August 22nd. Daughter of Jacob Henry Rothschild, Jewish immigrant, and not related to the Rothschilds, the banking family. And Elizabeth Ann Marston. Elizabeth Ann Marston, her family were WASPs from Rhode Island, and they owned the Marston Mills there. And she was born at 732 Ocean Avenue at the West End village of Long Branch. What's interesting about that is the Marstons owned at that before that most of Long Branch, New Jersey. They were summer homes for them. I don't know why they would leave the state of Rhode Island, because it's a beautiful state. So, give a little bit about her. Her mother dies in 98. She was about 5 years old, or just shy of it. She had an older sister, Helen, and her father immediately remarries in 1900 to Eleanor Frances Lewis. And they never got along. It was cutthroat in that house. And I think this is where she gained her abilities to be the perceived vicious human being that she was perceived to be. Anyhow, but what they did is they actually grew up on the Upper West Side of New York. And she attended the Convent of the Blessed Sacrament, Roman Catholic, all-girls, private school, parochial school, the sister to where Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis attended, the sister school being just a block away. Excuse me. Now, it's kind of strange. Why would a mixed religious background gal go to a Roman Catholic school? Because her stepmother felt that the nuns would keep her in line. So that tells you a little bit about Eleanor. So they were learning about the Immaculate Conception, and her comment to the person who was teaching it was, "Do you mean spontaneous combustion?" And she was immediately removed from that school. And then quickly thereafter, her stepmother dies in 1903. So anyway, she goes on to Miss Dana's in Morristown, New Jersey, graduates in 11, does some translating, teaches piano, does the ladylike thing. By the way, Miss Dana's is a finishing school, if anybody's unaware. Realizes that this thing isn't for her, and immediately sends a whole slew of poems, little over 100 poems, to Vanity Fair in 1914. They publish one. But it's paid. And then they continue to publish more. Now, at the same time, in 1914, she becomes editorial assistant at Vogue magazine. Now, Vogue magazine was owned by Condé Nast. And boy, oh boy, did she get her first experience with true elegance. And she worked with them until 1916. She was, at this particular point in time, able to maneuver the waters to almost becoming the assistant to the assistant of Condé Nast. That's pretty damn close. But she received an offer that she couldn't refuse, which was to be a staff writer for Vanity Fair in 1916. And she didn't have to do any of that navigating the waters thing. And remember, she's a woman at the turn of the century. This is not an easy time. That's not 2014. So in 1917, she meets and marries Edwin Pond Parker II, banker, broker, comes from heir to a what is that? There's a shark product or whaling oil, pond whaling oil, and she was able to maintain some semblance of where she wanted to be in New York society, because still that was very important to her at this early point in time. And she didn't feel that she was yet witty enough to get herself in the right circle. But she began to make really good friends with Benchley and Sherwood. And she married Parker. Now Parker goes away for World War I, and I was talking to this gentleman over here, she starts to have some sort of unrequited love with Robert Benchley. Now Benchley never returns that to her. I mean, he was just kind to her. And she felt alone, and you know, she was an orphan, really. She had no parents. And her sister disowned her. So, I mean, there was just a lot of things going on. So, what happens? We're talking 1920. From 1920 to 1932, I'm going to do big spans here. She writes 300 poems. She writes 300 to 350 free verses, both for Vanity Fair, Vogue, The New Yorker, Life magazine, The New Republic, and McCall's. Now, during her marriage to Parker, she has an affair with Seward Collins, another muckety-muck from Wall Street, but a writer in his own right, and a critic, but a married man. Her second and longest term affair during this marriage was to Charles MacArthur. His brother and sister-in-law, just to let you know, This is what ties together American literature, even here in the 21st century. Charles and John and Catherine are the John and Catherine of the John and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation Genius Awards. Okay? And these people, this foundation, gives 2 Genius Awards a year, which is $1 million to each individual, for great performance in whatever it is that's in their field of literature, art, film, whatever it may be. And a lot of it revolved around the relationship that that Charles had with Dorothy Parker. She was so John and Catherine were so impressed by her and by the circles that she was running in, and that there was so much new, modern writings and criticisms and plays that this is what they ended up creating. And by the way, they fund a majority of public broadcasting. That's the second branch of the John T. and Catherine MacArthur Foundation. But a couple of sad things happened, which was pretty scandalous at the time. She ends up getting pregnant by Charles MacArthur. And she aborts the child and immediately falls into a chronic depression, and this is her first attempt at suicide. And this would eventually inspire one of her best pieces. And I'm going to give you a quote that she wrote a little bit later in life. How like me to put all my eggs into one bastard. So in 27-28, after this depression, after this affair is over, and by the way, she still, I don't know, she still has this passion for Robert Benchley. She's still fawning over Charles MacArthur. She's married to Edwin Parker. There's a lot going on here, okay? And she's writing 300 poems and doing all of this work. And on top of it, she becomes politically active. And a fellow roundtabler by the name of Ruth Hale, the first real, true American modern feminist, part of the Hale Society, they hang out together, and she's part of the round table. And they go to Boston, and they're fighting for some sort of civil liberty, and they're arrested. They're both arrested. And Ruth is arrested for a little bit more than Dorothy is, but she's arrested for loitering and sauntering. Do we saunter today? So anyway, so she became very active in civil rights, civil liberties, and she was a major critic of fascism. This is 1927-28. At this point in time, about 32, she meets J.S. Perlman. 28, she finally divorces Parker. And Parker is heartbroken. Kind of silly, but heartbroken. Anyways, in 32, she meets J.S. Perlman. In 34, she meets and marries Alan Campbell, who was substantially younger than her. I don't know how many years. Now, he was an actor and a wannabe screenwriter, and he was the most reputed bisexual in Hollywood, as well as in New York City. And And her quote about that, I mean, for a while she said, oh, no, no, no. But her final quote was, queer as a billy goat. So they both moved to Hollywood as freelance writers and lyricists. And this is where she gets, and remember, how many of these guys are going back and forth? Okay, and they're all doing this at the same time. They're all hanging around, still doing the same thing that they would be doing in New York. They're doing it elsewhere. So she meets Bing Crosby and Ralph Granger and Robert Carson and Susan Hayward, and she falls into a love-hate relationship with W. Somerset Maugham. Because he's there selling his wares as well. And in 1936, she founds the Hollywood Anti-Nazi League and the Anti-Fascist Rescue Committee. And what that is to get Jews and other people out of Europe. And she becomes fast friends with the big guys. Mayer and the founders of Fox Studios, the big execs. And they're funneling money into this to get people out of Europe because they felt something was wrong. So she goes back to New York. She lives at 23 East 74th Street on the Upper East Side, the Volney Hotel, which is still there, but a little bit more upscale. And she's still writing for the New Yorker. Now that she has big, almost leftist ideals, because she's associated with Perelman, who was at the time probably the most vocal communist, I would say, the most vocal communist of the 30s and 40s. And they thought communism would overcome the fascist rule, and he wasn't really thinking it through. But anyhow, so Nation magazine, the oldest magazine in America, takes Dorothy Parker on as a staff writer. And boy, oh boy, does that open up a can of worms. And she's also writing for Esquire magazine, as well as all of the other magazines that she was writing for previously, Vogue and Vanity Fair. Well, not Vanity Fair anymore. So anyway, so she divorces in 1947 Alan Campbell, and then remarries him in 1950. And it's a big mess. And she's still with Charles MacArthur, and she's fawning all over Robert Benchley. I mean, it's just, it's crazy. So in 42, in 50, she goes back to Hollywood, does some more stuff in Hollywood. 52, she returns back to New York, and there's this back and forth. Now, the table is already gone. Several members have died by this point in time. And she's considered a pariah. She's vocally and visibly a drunkard. And she's touting leftist, what was considered at the time leftist nonsense. And in 63, for her last hurrah, she figured, well, okay, I'll write a big splashy article on the benefits of communism. And that when that dropped from the Nation magazine, she received word in Hollywood that her husband had committed suicide by heroin overdose. And why we know that? Because he wrote a suicide letter. So her life falls apart. And not a magazine would touch her. Not a newspaper would touch her. She dies in June 7th, 1967, a pauper. And I'll tell you what her life's works are. 2 Academy Awards for screenplay. The most popular person on the Hollywood blacklist. 1 O. Henry Award, 10 novels, 30 screenplays, 10 pieces of music for plays, a little over 3,000 journalistic pieces, and tens of thousands of critical pieces. Now, I told you she died a pauper. What was interesting is that both her husband, Alan Campbell, both her ex-husband Alan Campbell and her ex-husband Edwin Parker left a small estate for her which she was unaware of, because she was so much in the druthers of alcoholism. And she had stated in her will, and her executrix, I believe, was Lillian Hellman. And all of her estate, whatever was left, someone to pay some of her debt for living in the hotel, which she lived there for free. I mean, she didn't live there for free, but she acquired, the owners said, well, don't worry about it. By the way, the owner of the Volney was Frank Case's son, Frank Case Jr., just to tie stuff together for you. All of her money ended up going to the Martin Luther King Foundation, which then reverted to a huge piece of the NAACP's educational works. So another piece that she gave to today's society. So I'm going to leave you with that. Martha, Carol, whoever wants to come up. And
Carol that has to
okay, are you coming up to read some Dorothy?
Carol has
Carol left?
she's in the restroom.
Oh, she's in the restroom. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, do you have any questions right now?
Yes.
Yes.
What is the Helen Hayes connection? Helen Hayes.
Helen Hayes. Well, on again, off again. Friends.
I think she once said that she didn't like her acting
Right.
and that her emotional range went from A to B.
A to B. Yep. But the thing about Dorothy Parker, no matter how awful she was to you in critiques, and he and I talked about, what is your name, sir? Dennis and I spoke about this. She was really a heartfelt human being. I mean, she carried that armor with her so strong, but she was really, really incredible a person. Like I said, you look at her activities in the political framework. Trying to end racism, and so on and so forth. Carol, please.